What's next for the Washington Wizards? This was certainly a strange year for Washington, and a lot of teams can attest to it just being a really odd year of NBA basketball. It's not a small accomplishment that they were able to make the postseason this year. They went through a lot of stuff in the beginning of the year, and even though the top-end talent on this roster is clear, what's going to happen with them moving forward is not. So in this video, we're going to be talking about what they're going to be doing next, what their year looked like this most recent season, and kind of just the future outlook of the Washington Wizards. But really quickly before we get started, I like to remind people, what's up? My name is Sucker. If you're new, consider subscribing to the channel. I upload every single day on this channel. It's the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If you enjoy the video as well, you can leave a like rating on it. If you want to hang out with me outside of these videos, you can check out a Linktree link down in the description below. With all those things said, let's take a look back at the year for Washington. So as I said, this was a weird season. Prior to the year, once they made the Russell Westbrook for John Wall trade, I thought that they were going to be a playoff team. I thought the top level talent of Beal and Westbrook was going to be enough to be able to get them into the postseason. And then early in the year, it was clear that that wasn't going to be super easy. At one point in the beginning of the year, Washington went 2 weeks without doing anything, with all the protocol stuff that they had to deal with at the beginning of the year and then injury stuff throughout the season as well. It's honestly incredible that they were able to make the postseason. They won in the play-in games and took a game off Philadelphia and arguably could have extended the series even further with Joel Embiid's injury coming about the way that it did. In terms of some of the individual players, there were some interesting performances this year. Beal and Westbrook did what you would expect them to do. Bertans unfortunately just had a down year. I don't know if it's something that's going to continue for him, if he just had a bad year. Keep in mind that he got hurt at the end of the year last year, did not participate in the bubble, signed a new extension. But him having a down year certainly hurt them because they were counting on him to be this sharpshooter type guy, and that just wasn't what he was, at least not in comparison to the year before. Some of the other, younger guys certainly had some interesting seasons. I'm intrigued by Denny. It seemed like Denny fit. They certainly need a guy on the wing like him, hoping to see some improvement for him going into this offseason as he gets healthy. And Rui is another guy that I think Rui Hachimura is a good player. I think he's going to continue to improve. It was only his second year. His three-point percentage stuff went up. He plays big minutes for this team. I think he could be a significant piece. Not an all-star level piece, but still someone that can be really good for them moving forward. We'll see what Thomas Bryant looks like when he comes back fully healthy. Daniel Gafford looked awesome after coming over midseason from Chicago. So a lot of interesting pieces for Washington. And again, it's a big deal that they made the postseason, but now, of course, everything is going to be looking at this offseason, specifically Bradley Beal. Okay, as we look at the offseason for Washington, we'll begin with the payroll stuff. Spoiler alert, they don't have any cap space. They've got Beal, they've got Bertans, they've got Westbrook. Those guys are taking up a significant amount of their space. Once we get into the 2022 offseason, when Beal and Westbrook can opt out, they'll be looking at more cap space, but there's no guarantee that either of those guys, in my opinion, are still going to be on the roster by that point. And we'll just go ahead and cut to the chase. Everything about this offseason for Washington revolves around Bradley Beal and his impending free agency in 2022, as well as potential trades for him. There are other free agents on the roster. You can look at a Thomas Bryant extension. You can look at a handful of guys that are free agents for them this offseason, but none of them are nearly as significant as Bradley Beal, and that's what the entire future revolves around for them. I've said in multiple videos that I think Bradley Beal, with his most recent extension, was just trying to get his money with Washington, which made complete sense, by the way, and I don't blame him for that at all. And then he was kind of waiting it out until this moment, the 2021 offseason, where he has a player option for 2022, and there's no guarantee that he's going to be coming back. If Bradley Beal does not sign an extension with Washington this offseason, I think I would nearly guarantee that he is going to be traded this offseason or prior to next year's trade deadline. If Bradley Beal is still on the roster when we get to the 2022 offseason and he has not yet signed an extension, I would, one, be shocked, and two, be shouting from the rooftops how big of a mistake that would be for Washington. Publicly, he's been very committed to the Wizards. He's been a complete professional about everything the entire time, but as we know, with the history of the way these things work in the NBA, typically, these guys either ask out and use the leverage of impending free agency to go where they want to go, or they sign a big money extension in the offseason and they maybe explore being traded a little bit more down the road. I personally think that Bradley Beal is committed to Washington and he wants to be there, but he also really wants to win basketball games, and there's just not enough upside on this roster to convince him that the Wizards are a place where he is going to have a successful next couple of years of his career. He is squarely in his prime. He has earned his money, and now his focus is going to shift towards joining a team that is going to allow him to potentially contend for a title. And as you look at this Washington team, that just isn't the place where that's going to happen. You have Russ, you have Bertans, you have some young guys like Denny and Rui, but apart from that, not a ton of upside, no salary cap space, not a ton of tradable assets. You already owe a future pick to Houston, which limits the amount of future picks that you can trade, and ultimately, the best decision for the roster is probably to trade Beal and then Westbrook afterwards, and ultimately, I think that's the most likely outcome as well. I don't think you can really get a ton out of Bertans, and that contract really hinders them in terms of what they could potentially do in free agency. And even as much as I like Rui, and I think Denny could be good down the road, I don't think either of those guys are necessarily exciting anybody else around the league. There is some upside here with the improvement of Rui, with the improvement of Denny, with Thomas Bryant coming back healthy next year, with Daniel Gafford looking as good as he did, but ultimately, I think this is a Bradley Beal trade situation in Washington. Where exactly he's going to get traded to, what the compensation is going to look like, I have no idea, but I would be really, really shocked if that is not the avenue that they go down. Now, as I said, the possibility exists that he signs an extension. He doesn't have to sign this huge 5-year extension. He can sign, he can add a year to his deal and maybe explore free agency in the following offseason if he feels like that is a better option for him. But things get really, really interesting in Washington really, really quickly if he does decide to ask out and he wants to be traded, because then you've got to figure out what to do with Westbrook, then you got to figure out what to do with Bertans, and it's a complete reset in Washington. I really looked and I really tried to figure out a way in which there could be significant improvement to this roster, how they could add a guy that can actually guard to this team. And that option just doesn't exist. They're maybe going to have, some exemptions available to them in free agency where they can sign someone to a mid-level exception or something like that. But really what they need is they need a guy in the wing that can guard, that can support Beal and Westbrook. And they've got the big stuff figured out. If Thomas Bryant comes back healthy, I think Gafford's good. I think Rui can be a nice stretch four if he shoots the ball well next year. But they're just not going to be able to guard well enough. They're not going to be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference anytime soon. And I think ultimately that's going to result in a Bradley Beal trade. And so ultimately, there's two options here for the offseason for Washington. Beal signs an extension, they try to build a competent team, they go from there, or he requests a trade this offseason prior to the trade deadline, or for some reason they wait and hope to re-sign him as an unrestricted free agent in 2022 once he opts out, which I think would potentially be a disaster. If he stays, fantastic. If not, they should be able to build something competent over the next handful of years there in Washington. They should get a significant amount of assets in exchange for him. But all that stuff is just kind of a wait-and-see situation at this point. In terms of the outlook for Washington, it's not fantastic, but it's really not the end of the world either. It's an accomplishment for them to have made the playoffs. They've got two really good players, and at least they have that. There are a lot of other teams that are in the situation that Washington's in right now that don't have the top-level talent that they do. And if Beal re-signs, they're going to be a decent team. Maybe they can get themselves up towards like the 5th seed in the East, right? It was a very odd year with injuries and protocol stuff that really held them back, and you could make the case that they should have had a significantly better record if some things went their way this most recent season. I'd certainly be willing to listen to that case, but ultimately, I think this is a team that we're going to be watching. There's going to be a ton of rumors, and Beal, even immediately after they were eliminated, was non-committal to Washington. Not that I'm expecting him to come out in a press conference and say, hey, I'm going to sign an extension, I'm not going anywhere, but I think ultimately this is a leverage type situation, and Bradley Beal is going to end up on a team that he wants to be on unless he signs an extension this offseason, which is just kind of the way that it is sometimes for Washington. They had opportunities to build a really good team. They had some bad luck along the way with the John Wall injury stuff. And I think this is probably an end of an era for Washington in terms of what is next for them. I'm hoping that some of the young guys develop. Maybe a trade scenario outside of Beal and Westbrook develops where they can go out and get somebody. We've seen some surprising stuff happen before with trade situations like this. But ultimately, Bradley Beal holds the future of the Washington Wizards in his hands, and his decision informs everything. There's not really anything else they can do. There aren't really a ton of other options here. They're just sitting around waiting on Bradley Beal to commit to them or to not. And if he doesn't commit to them this offseason, I would expect other teams to get really aggressive in trying to get him out of there. And if I was in charge there in Washington, I would start seriously looking at options to go and trade him. I know that they love Bradley Beal. I know that they love what he means to the city and how committed he's been to them in an era in which a lot of other stars would not have been that committed to them. But ultimately, I think that script is going to flip this offseason. We'll see Bradley Beal in a different uniform. And I'm interested to see what that trade looks like, what they can get in return for him, and then how they try and build their roster around him moving forward. And then what that means for Westbrook. I have no idea what is going to happen with Russell Westbrook if Bradley Beal isn't on this roster anymore, because he's got the opportunity to opt out in 2022 as well. Do you want to lose him for nothing? Can you find some value there? Or is it just going to be too difficult given the fact that it's like a $44 million expiring essentially for this upcoming season, lots of question marks, but again, the first domino is Bradley Beal and what he does with his decision this offseason. But yeah, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think Washington should do or will do. I'm interested to see you guys' opinions on every single one of these teams as we continue to go through what is next for each of these teams as they get eliminated from the playoffs. With all those things said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel, leave a like rating on the video as well, and you can check me out at various socials and a Linktree link down in the description below. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.